So if you're just joining, thank you, welcome. Here's a link to the slides in the chat. And on slide 2 is the link to sign in, especially if you are interested in sketches, and we are going to do some work in the slides, so you kind of want to be in there anyway. I'm going to give it another 30 seconds and then I'm going to let Barb get started. So while we're waiting, I'm Chris Gear. I'm the MyStar Professional Learning Coordinator, and I know most of you, if not all of you already. Thank you for being here. And with me today is Barb McIntyre, who many of you or most of you know also. She's our she's on our MyStar assessment team, and she and I are both retired MyStar teachers, so have spent quite a bit of time in the classroom with middle school kids, and now are enjoying being able to work with MyStar. So one more time for the link to the slides. And oh, we got a couple more people showing up just now. And I'm going to go ahead and let Barb start, and I will just keep linking those slides as people come in.
Okay.
In my portfolio, and then
let's see, Chris, can we mute anybody who is, there we go. All right, there we go. All right, today what we are going to do is take a look at what kind of test taking skills students are going to need. The new 3D NGSS-aligned assessment.
Oh, Barb, I muted you by, I'm sorry.
Oh, no problem. Got it now. Okay, sounds good. We're going to take a look at some of the informational reading strategies that may help students to be more successful, not only with test taking, but also just in general with NGSS-aligned assessment. We're going to take a look at transfer distance and what that means and how we can help students to gain some confidence with transfer distance. And then we're going to try and take a look at how we can encourage our students to use the design of NGSS-aligned assessment, that sense-making scaffolded design actually helps them be more successful with, you know, achieving and showing proficiency with assessment items. So that's our plan for today. We're going to be pushing it to get it all done in an hour and a half, but we're going to try. So, all right. So let's start by thinking about what kind of test-taking skills we've taught students in the past. I remember, you know, when I was in the classroom, we had M-STEP and MEEP, and we spent a lot of time teaching kids how to take tests to be more successful on those types of standardized tests. So here's what I'd like you to do. Chris is going to put you into your breakout groups, and I want you to think about, you know, kind of that traditional test taking and traditional test design that we've taught in the past, and that maybe is being used in a lot of the other subjects, not science so much anymore, but what kind of test taking skills have we taught students to ensure their success with traditional standardized tests, not NGSS aligned, but those traditional tests? So with your breakout group, talk about a few of those strategies that you've used in the past to teach your students to be successful, and then respond on one of the slides. Chris has them labeled with your group number or your team number. And so if you would respond on those sticky notes with some of the ideas you have about traditional standardized test taking skills that students have needed in the past.
Okay, and so I'm going to assign breakout rooms just randomly. Please introduce yourself briefly so you know who you're working with, and we'll use these rooms throughout the session today. And then as Barb asked, please find the slide with your room number or team number, grab one of those sticky notes, and record some of the things that you're talking about in your group. All right, everybody's back. Take it away, Barb.
All right, fantastic. I am seeing a lot of things that I used to teach my kids as well for test taking skills. The big one was, you know, item elimination. If there are 4 multiple choice answers, you can usually get rid of 1 for sure and maybe 2. Now your chances are up to 50%. Memorization, they answer the easy ones. skip the ones you don't know. And if you can go back and do those last, read the entire thing first. Oh gosh, highlight, underline, box or rectangle, those key phrases, circle, underline keywords, and there were a lot of rote memorization. So knowing those terms, finding those vocabulary words you knew. We all used a lot of these, and Chris and I were even laughing about, we used to do the big, get enough sleep, eat a good breakfast. At one time, I was even a meat cheerleader, and we had a big assembly, and we rah-rahed everybody that you can do it, let's build your confidence, all of those things. And so I'm seeing a lot of the same traditional standardized test taking skills that Chris and I used in our classrooms as well. So now that we've got this we've got some ideas about some of these traditional test taking strategies, and we had a chance to talk to each other and kind of get to know who's in our groups a little bit. Let's talk a little bit about how things are different now. What are some of the 3D test taking strategies students might need? How are things different, and how can we best prepare them for some of these state and national tests that might be different than what they've seen in the past? And so let's start with the design. How is the test different itself? So we really need to think about the design of these items before we can figure out how we can best prepare our students. So here are some of the design features that we probably need to consider that might be different than what students are used to when they do more of a multiple choice traditional type test. Generally, an item begins with some sort of phenomenon or problem, something that students need to grapple with, and lots of times there's information in there that students need. Lots of times there's a transfer distance or a new context. Very rarely are they asked just memorization terms, and the vocab is not the most important thing like it used to be. So having this idea that they can take the skills, abilities, knowledge that they've learned and transfer them to a new context and use them. These items often are scaffolded, and in order to be NGSS aligned, need to guide students through a sense-making and reasoning process. So once we can help students to unlock a little bit about the key of how these things are designed, it can actually help them to use that whole sense-making reasoning structure to come up with a better final answer, a better answer all over. Oftentimes, there's multiple modalities in these questions, so they're rich. And I've even taken a look at some of the ACT items. They're not what we used to do, like the multiple choice, a lot more of a reading test. Can I make sense of data? Can I look for evidence? Can I use charts and graphs? I need to be able to read, and I need to be able to integrate information from lots of different sources in order to answer these questions. So that gets us to that integration. Science and engineering practices, content, and the cross-cutting concepts are all very important for students to be able to integrate. So this is a big lift. This is a big ask of students. It really doesn't feel quite fair to just throw them in and say, go for it. We really need to help them to prepare for these types of tests, because in many other subjects, being tested probably the same way they always have. So science looks a little different to them, and let's get them ready and prepared. So that's what our goal is today. We're hoping that we can give you some materials that you can modify in your classroom. Some you can even use tomorrow if you want to help get your students ready. So let's talk some more about the test taking skills. If we think about this new design and we think about the features of an NGSS aligned assessment, in addition to some of those traditional test taking skills that we noted earlier, some of them are still really important, reading carefully. Sometimes they can use some item elimination. There are still multiple choice questions. But in addition to those sorts of things, what else do students need for success? So I think that I don't think we're going to put you in groups. Is that right, Chris? We're just going to take a few
Not for
minutes
this,
here.
just as an
Okay.
individual, grab a row and
So-
see what you can fill in.
Several different slides. When you think about this new design on slide 13, 14, 15, 16, and 17, pick a row, and What are some of the traditional skills that you think are still useful? And what are some additional skills that students might need? We're going to give you just a couple minutes to kind of think it over and add your thoughts to these slides. Okay, Chris, whenever you're ready, I think we can move
I'm ready.
on. All right, well, let's go ahead and take a look at these then. Some brilliant ideas here. You know, some of the traditional skills that are still useful, making educated guesses, reading for understanding, we still need to do these things. But we also have this making an educated guess using information or parts of the question. And we want to teach kids how to use that sense making, the reasoning, in order to come up with a full answer that throws in those key parts of the text. I'm also seeing some things about not just reading, gathering information, but let's really teach kids how to analyze and interpret charts and graphs and other kinds of information. And we're going to give you some things today maybe you can use for that. Reading carefully, not skimming, using the pieces, the other information you're getting in your written answers and making those connections to something you already know. We want to help kids understand that they have what they need to be successful, that transfer distance really isn't that big a deal. They already know and they can connect. We're going to give you some tools for that. Taking breaks when needed, if you're not timed, absolutely. Looking for those key pieces of information and making connections, reasoning carefully and logicking, you know, using logic as you move through. Time management can still be important, but I think rather than skipping hard questions, thinking about how those hard questions, how you can use that sense-making design to help you be successful on those harder questions. And then looking for the background knowledge that's in the reading, completing multi-step directions. They do need some practice with that. Process of elimination can still be helpful on some of the multiple choice or the more easy scaffolded questions. And then critical thinking, problem solving, we need to help students. And the MyStar curriculum in general, I think really helps to build that problem solving, critical thinking skill throughout the curriculum. And the new programming we're not going to be able to help you with, instead of just selecting a correct response, the pencil paper to the digital format. We would love to be able to do that, but we just don't have the staff or funding to make all of our assessments in a digital format. So that's going to be on you to teach them that. And then double check directions. That's really important to double check your answers. So how do we know? How does MyStar know what kinds of things we can expect on the M-STEP? We have the same access as you do. We have we've looked at the released items. We've also looked at released items for the ACT and some other state and national tests. Greg Bluth, Dr. Greg Bluth is our coordinator of assessment. So he is in charge of the assessment group, and he's served with the Michigan Department of Education review team to assess, help them figure out how we can assess these NGSS standards. So he worked with a group to look at how to interpret the PEs in terms of assessment. Here's what he took away and what he shared with us. We're using the same process for assessment generation as the Michigan Department of Education and the M-STEP. So our process to come up with questions is the same as the process they're using. Our questions might be different, but the structure should be the same, and the process we use to take a look at the PEs, to pick them apart, figure out what we're going to assess and how we're going to assess it is very similar to what the Department of Education is using. So that means that we are very hopeful that when your students use our MyStar assessment, they are getting prepared for both the M-STEP and for other national tests, high stakes tests that they might encounter in the future. So we're very hopeful that our assessments are as much as possible aligned to what your students are going to see on some of these later assessments. So let's talk about some of the specific test taking strategies. Here's the stuff we were hoping to get to today. Let's talk about what maybe you could do in your classroom, or some strategies that maybe you could modify in your classroom to help your students be as prepared as possible for some of these NGSS-aligned assessments. So we're going to focus on 3 things today. We're going to look at informational reading, and that includes reading of all kinds of charts, graphs, data, all of that kind of thing. We're going to look at transfer distance. How can we build confidence in our students that they're prepared for these new contexts? And how can students use scaffolding to get comfortable and to find ways to use that scaffolding to become more successful as they move through the items? So that's what we're going to try to give you today. Some actual strategies you can use with your students to help in these 3 areas.
So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about our informational reading products that are already in MyStar that might be of use to you, and a couple of ideas of things you can do with them. So we wish that MSTEP and 3D assessments weren't reading tests. In MyStar, we encourage you to go above and beyond to give kids other ways to get the information besides reading it themselves, read it to them, show a video, all those kinds of things. But reading is still a key skill that kids need to be successful on these tests. And as Barb mentioned, reading informational text, that text also includes graphs and models and tables and all of that kind of stuff also. And so we want to get kids lots of experience with that. And so we have added readings to the share phase of lessons in each of our units. They are optional, but if you want to beef up your kids' reading skills in general, you may select to use those. In our newly revised units, those reading guides to go with those readings are even differentiated. So there's some scaffolding for kids at the top and the bottom of the reading abilities list. Notice and note is another strategy that we use in our readings that I would like to pull out and talk to you about because it's particularly good for this purpose. Unveiling the data story is something that Barb modified a reading strategy, and we'll give you some samples that you can use. And then we do have analysis questions in our revised units also that are great practice 3D scenario material. So our optional share readings employ reading strategies that we've gotten from our work with reading apprenticeship, from our work with reading specialists in some of our districts. And they include things that like from Harvard Project Zero. So lots of ways to make your thinking visible and become a better reader. So they're kind of helping kids interact with the text, kind of having that mental monologue going that a good reader already has. And so you'll find these optional share readings in all of our units, and in the revised units, they're also differentiated. Notice and note is one of the strategies that we like particularly well from our work with some reading specialists. There are 5 different ways to look at a text. Some texts lend themselves more to one view more than others. In general, kids are going to, as they approach a text, whether it's an actual paragraph or a model or a table or whatever, and ask, what about this surprises me? What does the author think I already know? What changed or challenged or confirmed what I already knew? So those are things that good readers do kind of automatically in their head. And we're going to ask kids to kind of do that very purposefully. You can look for contrasts and contradictions, absolute and extreme language, probably not a ton of that in our 3D assessments. Numbers and stats, though, for sure. There are numbers and stats buried in those texts, quoted words, and then word gap. If you don't know a word, how do you stop and think about that? And so there is an example linked here for you. You can look at it later if you'd like, of an application of the notice and note strategy in one of our reading guides. Unveiling the data story. So unveiling the story is a reading strategy that helps kids think about what are they reading, how does that affect them, how does it affect their community, how does it affect the world at large. You know, you just kind of keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So Barb modified this strategy a little bit to help kids focus specifically on data, tables and graphs. And so we prompt them to consider the titles, the axes, the columns, the patterns, the ranges, etc. You can use this for your own data or your own model, whatever unit you're using. And if you would just like some examples that you can use tomorrow, Barb did make a set of examples. This is from 8.7, which is being revised, and Barb's been working with Greg on the assessments, and so she's got some scenarios and some data ready to go. And so here's an example of a bar graph in the reading guide that goes with it to help kids analyze that graph. Here's another graph and the reading guide that goes with it. And then in the last one, she's got both of them. And so the kids are going to compare and contrast the two. So that's a strategy that you can use, and you can just take the example and pop in whatever data works for you if there's something in the unit that you're teaching right now. And then the last, but
one quick thing in, you know, using your own data from whatever unit, but you could also, this would make a great bell ringer. You can modify the questions as well if you want kids to focus specifically on patterning or asking questions about the data, that sort of thing. And this could even make a really nice homework assignment, but I would consider using this before EAs or pre-post tests if there's some data in the EA or pre-post test that you want to kind of have students pre-analyze, you know, think about it before they get there. And what the goal with this would be is to get them so that this is just their routine. Whenever they look at data, they go through these steps. What does the title tell me? What do the axes tell me? I need to take a look at the ranges. What do the patterns tell me? That kind of thing. So this just becomes second nature. And so if you use this frequently with them, get to the point where it's just second nature. This is what I do when I see a bar graph. I work through all of these steps. What questions do I have about it? What conclusion can I draw? All right, sorry, Chris.
no, that's okay. Thanks, Barb. And then the last piece that we have built into our revised our revised units, and eventually it'll be in all our units, is something called analysis questions. And really what they are is kind of practice embedded assessment. So in lessons where there is an embedded assessment for the check your progress, which, you know, is kind of a beefed up check your progress with a scenario and some questions. Before that, in the share, you'll see these analysis questions offered, and they are basically very similar to the embedded assessment, but they're for students to take. It allows you to do a little formative assessment before they take the embedded assessment. Are they really getting this? Do they need some reteach opportunities? And then we also have reteach ideas that can be used by your students with another adult so that it doesn't have the whole class. You don't have to go through reteach for the whole class. But an example for unit 6.1 in lesson 3, there is an embedded assessment. And so before students take the embedded assessment, they've got this reteach, or excuse me, this analysis question opportunity.
Oftentimes when we write these, we use the exact format of the EA. We just use a transfer distance. So it's a slightly different context, a slightly different scenario, but the skills are almost always identical to what the students are going to need in the EA.
Yeah, and so if you're looking for something to practice with your students right before MSTEP or right before an assessment in MyStar, those are good resources.
There's also a possibility if you are in a district where you have to retest. It's something you could use as a retest, and there, like Chris said, there are reteach suggestions that you can use. So if you've got students that don't do well on an EA and you want to use the analysis questions instead as a retest after doing some reteaching, that's another possibility for a way to use these.
All right, we're gonna pop you back in your breakout rooms and let you chew on this for just a few minutes. And we'll do a little see, think, wonder. So if you would talk to the people in your group a little bit. What did you see? What do you think? What do you wonder about the informational reading strategies that we just presented? So take a couple minutes and take a little time to talk to some people about what you just heard or saw. All right, thanks everybody, welcome back. I'm turning this over to Barb again.
Okay, so Chris is showing Team 2's work, and I would say, gosh, your wonders, I'd like to take a look at your wonders. We wish we had more information about the M-STEP, and Chris can jump in on this too. We know kind of what you know. We see the released items. We know the work that Greg has done. We know our processes for generating questions is the same. We don't see the M-STEP questions ahead of time, and the Michigan Department of Education does not share those with MyStar. So we would hope that if their analysis of the PEs, if we are using, like Greg has helped with that, and he knows how they're going about trying to interpret the PEs for assessment purposes, but he, we have not seen actually generated questions, and I'm not even sure who's writing the questions. I don't know if that's something done by groups of teachers like it used to be, or if it's done differently. So I wish I could answer that. Chris, is there anything you wanted to add about that?
It's just, unfortunate. I was always unhappy in the classroom because you can't look at M-STEP, or it, they can invalidate your school's test scores, or if you do look at it, you can't tell anybody. So, it's hard to say. All we can do is say what Barb has said, that MyStar staff worked with MDE in the early days of developing M-STEP and developing NGSS-aligned assessments. And so their samples look similar to our scenarios. We're going to hope that we're all on the same page.
And we do think that the skills should be transferable, because if they're interpreting the PEs correctly, or the way we are, and Greg suspects that for the most part they are, the skills should be transferable. The level that they ask, I've heard reports from some teachers that there are still some kind of vocab-based questions, but if they are doing NGSS aligned assessment as they say they are, then it should be very similar. And we've looked at the way they set theirs up in terms of formatting for parts. We've looked at the way they present phenomenon and scenarios, and we've tried to use similar methods, and we kind of have a sneaking suspicion that maybe they've looked at some of ours too as a way, but I couldn't tell you that for sure. So let's see. Okay, let's see, Chris, where are you? All right. MyStar, do we have plans to revise all the units? Chris, you would be a good one to answer that.
Yes.
We have plans to revise all the assessment. I will tell you that for sure.
Yeah. Yes, we do. Prioritizing them with our small staff. We only have a few people who work for MyStar full time. And so we do have a list of units that are going to be revised. The Kendall Hunt workbooks have pushed us to revise a little quicker, because once it's in print, we don't want to change it. So we will have about more than half our units revised by fall. And then the other 10 units will happen hopefully within the following year.
Okay. Wondering more about the data story and hope to use it with students. I would say that I think it could be using something similar or modifying it to your classroom or to the actual model or data that you're using could really help students to get in the habit of learning how to analyze and interpret data. That was one of the weaknesses I felt like my students had. And when we started using MyStar and there were purposes for data rather than just these, random questions we would ask, we got better at it. But I know that's something that is challenging for students, but the better they get at it, the more successful they're going to be at all kinds of state and local or state and national tests. Okay, let's talk about transfer distance a little bit. It's something that freaks students out sometimes, except your non-studying kids. Non-studying kids love transfer distance because, man, it doesn't really do them any good to memorize a bunch of stuff. Transfer distance would have terrified me as a student because I just wanted to be able to memorize everything. This is a little shift for students. It's a big shift for parents. Like, how can you trust my child on this when you haven't taught them about rock pocket mice? You only taught them about, resistant bed bugs, So I think once we build student confidence that they understand they have the skills they need and that we've taught them what they need to be successful with a new context, I also like to get on my soapbox and say, this is what we need to do in life, right? And so giving students the practice early with transferring their knowledge and skills and abilities to a new context is just fantastic. And teaching them to be problem solvers and use reasoning on that scaffolded approach. So let's kind of take a look at this. Take a look. So what we're going to ask you to do is take a look at an embedded assessment. And I want to, before we even start, we've got draft in big letters here. This is all draft stuff that we're working on right now. Greg and I are working on revising the assessment. He's working on revising the unit. I know Chris has helped with that. I know Steph has helped with that some too. And so this is probably not what you're going to see in the end. And so please be kind. Some of the wording needs to be tweaked yet. Things are not perfectly scaffolded yet. We're still in the process of creating these, but because we're in the process of it, they're fresh in my mind. And so we're going to take a look at an embedded assessment. We're going to look at the draft pre-post item. And what we're going to ask you to do is to identify the new context, the scientific knowledge, DCI, that students will need for each of those, and what science and engineering practices. And if you've forgotten SEPs, Chris has a really handy link. So if you click on that, you'll be able to see. So in this lesson, here's what students are doing. They're going to look at, and Chris, could you go back to that the last one that you were on? Yes. Yes, thanks. The lesson, they're going to do a simulation about the greenhouse effect. They're going to do some modeling of molecular structure and how it affects motion. That's in the uncover portion of the lesson. Then they're going to have to organize data about the structure and motion and how that affects the way those molecules react to energy. And then they're going to make a model of the greenhouse effect on Earth and generate questions that they still have about the greenhouse effect and how greenhouse gases work on Earth. So this is a quick recap of what they're going to do in the lesson. We'd like you to look at the embedded assessment and the pre-post item. We'd like you to identify the context, identify what they will need to know. What is the DCI knowledge that is needed in order to complete those? And then what scientific and engineering practices will they need? So this is kind of a little work for you so that you're ready to help your students see how all of these things are connected. And a little later, we've got something that you can use with your students to help them see those connections. So whenever you're ready.
Okay, so I'm going to put you in your rooms. You're going to need to look at those two documents, the embedded assessment and the pre-post item, and then find the slide for your team and see what you can fill in.
All right.
All right, everybody's back.
Okay, fantastic. So really quickly, we don't want to spend a lot of time on this because we want to get everything that we can in. In the lesson, the context is Earth, and it's just the greenhouse effect in general. When we look at the embedded assessment, we're talking about Mars, but we're really talking about how can we add greenhouse gases in order to get a warmer environment. In Unit 8.3 pre-post test, we're really looking at Earth, but we're looking at how we can use trees and maybe other interventions to try to remove greenhouse gases to reduce the effect of global warming. So a lot of the same skills, slightly different take. We generally don't assess asking questions in formal assessments because they're so hard to grade. Like, what are you going to say is a good question and a bad question? How are you going to grade that? So more important than having you do this, although we wanted to get you into some of these assessment items, is how can you help your students? So let's move on and let's take a look at how we can help our students. So we've put together this analyze a test scenario. You could use this before or after a pre-post. You could use it with a pre-post item that you've decided you're not going to give. Have students read through the pre-post item and then maybe fill this out in pairs or as a group. What do I already know about this? How is this something I've already learned? How is this different? What kind of skills do I have to use? Just to prove to them, look, you already have a lot of what you need to be successful on this pre-post item or this assessment item. And so this is a really nice little analysis piece that you can use in your classroom to help students build confidence that, look, I already know a lot about this. It's just slightly different. We're talking about Mars instead of Earth. It's the same thing. We're talking about trees instead of, one other way, a different way, but it's still the same thing. I still know about the greenhouse effect. I still know about greenhouse gas. All right, want to keep moving to try and get as much in as we can. One of the things we want to help students with is how they can use this sense-making process to be more successful. So as they work through one of these items, hopefully you notice that students were looking at phenomenons or problems, they were gathering evidence, they were applying scientific principles and reasoning, and they were making sense of that phenomenon or solving that problem. Generally, the last question, we call it putting it all together. So if we were to look at, and we're not going to take time because I want to make sure we get the strategies in for you to use, but if we were to look at that EA, we would see that in the intro, they got the phenomenon. In question 1, they had to use that table to gather evidence. 2 and 3, they applied their scientific principles and did their reasoning. And then question 4, put it all together for me, integrate everything and give me a good answer. All right, some strategies to help your students use that scaffolded design. Hack the answer. You could use this with your kids. So this is a modified version of the word, phrase, sentence reading strategy. And what we want students to do is to take a look at that question, what they need to do in the last question, that final question 4, and where can they get information from the scaffolded items to help them build that last answer. So what's the important word and the important phrase they can take from either the question or their answer to it in question 1 that they can contribute to question 4. So we've got an example for you from the EA you just looked at. We've also got a blank template for you to use. So what was from either their question or their answer, what was important, what phrase was important? 1, carbon dioxide, it's a greenhouse gas. 2, that greenhouse gases vibrate a lot. 3, they re-emit energy and that increases the temperature. And then here's our hints for question 4. Let's put it all together and write a good, complete answer. You could also have students use highlighters or different colors to code, in that final question. Where did I get my information? So I took something from question 1, question 2, question 3, and I built that question 4 answer using those ideas. So I like to tell students, if it's a scaffolded question, you're going to need to use all of those ideas in that final answer. Swing for the fences. When we write an assessment item, we think, what do students need to have in their heads and be thinking about in order to build that final answer? And then we try to prompt them with those scaffolded pieces. That's how these are designed. Okay, let's look at another strategy to help your kids. So this is a jigsaw. And so if we think about that EA or the analysis questions, and we didn't look at analysis questions, but there's a link to these analysis questions. You could split your kids into groups. So you have group A's and group B's, and maybe you put 2 to 4 kids in each group. Group A answers question 1 and 2. Group B answers question 3 and 4. And then you take a kid from group A, a kid from group B, put them together, and what group A had from 1 and 2, and what group B had from 3 and 4, they've got to come up with that final answer to question 5. So everybody is contributing. So you start with the kids in group A answering 1 and 2, kids in group B are answering question 3 and 4, and then you regroup kids so that every group has a person from group A and a person from group B. They bring their answers to 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, and they put all that information together in order to answer the last question. And they have to think about, how did each group contribute to the complete answer? What did I have to take from questions 1 and 2 in order to build my answer to question 5? What did I have to take from question 3 and 4 in order to build a good answer to question 5? So by jigsawing it and having each kid have some of the information they need from the scaffolded questions, they can work together to build that good final answer. Okay? And then optimizing answers. So this is a trick that I learned from another MyStar teacher. And what they like to give is to give an assessment scenario. So one of the pre-post clusters or bundles at the beginning of the unit, and kids know nothing and they have a really hard time and they're just guessing. Then partway through the lesson, after a couple lessons, they give it again. And they say, how can you change your answer? What can you add to your answer to make this answer better now? And then a couple more lessons, let's try it again. Here's that cluster again. Knowing what you know now, what can you add to your answer? What can you change to your answer? Let's optimize that answer. And then finally, at the end or every few lessons, give that to them. And then they're starting to see, what can we add? How can we change our answers? How can we make our answers better, until they're sort of building the perfect answer by the end. And they can see how they need to keep adding their new learning in order to get a really good complete answer. All right. And then rethink it. This is one that I think you could use very easily and very often. Critique either an anonymous student response, real or fake, to a final cluster question. So have that whole pre-post item on your projector, on your screen. Students take a look at the final answer and say, let's take a look at the scaffolding. What could we add to that answer in order to make it better? So did they put something in the final answer about greenhouse gases and how they move? Did they put something in the final answer about how adding or subtracting greenhouse gases would affect temperature? Look at that final one and then take those scaffolding pieces. What did we take from 1? Can we add anything from question 1 into that final answer to make it better? Let's take a look at question 2. Can we add anything from that final answer from question 2? And you could even use that word phrase strategy to help them find those things they need to add in. So you could have them working in groups. Everybody could draft, in their groups, draft a better answer using the scaffolding and then review it. I like the way but I'm curious why you said, could we include information from question 2 to make it better? So using a real or fake anonymous answer to one of those final questions, and then having students rethink that answer to better use the scaffolding to create a more complete answer. The more students are practicing that and thinking about using that scaffolding, the better they're going to get at thinking, oh, well, if they ask me about this in question 1, I probably should have something about that in my final answer. Oh, if they really wanted me to look at this data table and they asked me a question about the pattern in the data table, maybe that's something I need to bring into my answer, that we notice the temperatures are increasing. Because they asked me about that, maybe that's something I should have in here. So using some of those strategies hopefully will help your students. All right. And then let's see, where are we here? So we wanted to give you a few minutes. I know that was a real rush. We tried to get everything in as quickly as we could. Give you a little time to talk about what you've learned today. So in your groups, if you would connect something you already do to a strategy that we talked about today. Think about how you could extend one of these new practices or activities that we've talked about today. Challenges, what challenges do you face? What are you going to need to do to make it work? Chris, anything else you want to add about what we'd like them to discuss in their groups in the next 5 to 8 minutes?
Yeah, no, I don't think so. I think that's good. We just would like to give you a little time to, in small groups, kind of, again, chew on what you heard and maybe come up with a plan to use at least one thing that you heard.
And if you want to go back and look more carefully at some of the strategies that maybe we just flew by kind of quickly, feel free to go back and take a look at those and talk them over in your group.
All right, we're going to open up groups. We'll meet back at 4:55 for a quick wrap up. All right. Thanks,
Okay.
everyone. And we'll let Barb take over.
All right, I was looking at some of your challenges, and Team 3, the MyStar EA Access, I'm not sure about that, but I would say that in the newer units, the revised unit, using the analysis questions with some of these strategies might be a good way. And then Team 4, I was looking at this and I do agree, identifying the optimal items for analysis is important. Not every strategy is going to work with all of the same items. So figuring out which items are best is part of, I think, the challenge of using some of these. But if you have these strategies in your mind and you see something and you think, oh gosh, you know, I see that I need to get the kids ready for this EA, let's pop the data up there and have them go through unveiling the data story. You know, that might be, at least having these strategies in your mind might help. And we put this in kind of last minute here. One of the things that you get with pre and post tests are these assessment overview tables. And these can be really helpful for you in determining which items might be good to be used for what you want. And so the other thing that teachers sometimes don't always realize is that you don't necessarily have to give all of these items as part of your graded pre-post. Some of them can be used for instructional tools if you want. And so maybe you're going to choose one of these where you've got a lot of repetition of the content. And let's say number 5 looks really rich and you want to use that as an instructional tool rather than an assessment tool. Maybe you're going to teach the kids how to use the assessment using item cluster 5 or bundle 5. And maybe you're just going to give them some sort of a completion grade and you're going to use that as a teaching tool. So, you know, feel free to use these assessments. They are tools meant for your use. So be sure to use them in the way that you think serves your students best. And that might not be as a traditional assessment. It might be as a teaching tool. And maybe you're going to grade a little differently. Chris, any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it would be wonderful if we had a test bank of examples that you could use. Unfortunately, we have, again, a small staff, and right now we're revising as fast as we can the units that we do have. So that might be a future consideration for Barb and Greg. But in the meantime, please, you know, I've heard Barb talk about this often, but maybe you all haven't. Those, the pre-post test has multiple scenarios. You do not have to give all of them as your post test. So pick one and use it for these analysis kinds of activities and feel comfortable with that. And use that assessment overview table that's in the teacher version of the post test to decide which one of those clusters you want to use to teach your kids as an instructional tool versus to use as an assessment. And that is completely acceptable, 100%. So as Barb said, they are tools, these scenarios are tools for you to use. There's no law or rule that says you have to give every single one in the post test. So pick what you need, use it how you need to use it. All right, 5 o'clock. We have some upcoming virtual sessions here. If you would like to register, the links are there. We do have our Facebook group. We're trying to grow our community there. So if you're interested in that, there's a link there to join. And there's a link here for feedback. If you have a few minutes and you don't mind looking at that form and giving us some feedback, that's great. I will send an email tomorrow morning with sketch information. And then next week, after we have this video edited, I'll send the agenda with links to all of the resources and the video to you. All right, so Barb has to be somewhere. I will hang out for a little while if you have questions, and if not, thanks so much for being here and spending time with us, and enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thanks, everybody. I know
you.
it went really quick. We needed 2 hours, I think, but
Yeah, we did. We did. Next
Thank-
time we'll make it a 2-hour session.
Thank you.
thanks.